From Phantom History House. Welcome to another Phantom History House Calls. So that's right. Tonight we have a wonderful guest. Let me bring in Steve. Steve, you're in the potion room, although I am in the house in a different area. How are things going?
Things are going well. I'm really excited to have this guest on because we both had the opportunity to meet Aubrey when we were actually touring and visiting Savannah, Georgia. And she took us on a tour of this haunted location we're going to talk about. So it's really cool to kind of be able to check back in and see what she's been up to, which sounds like a lot.
We had so much fun in Savannah, and that tour was really the highlight, certainly one of the highlights of that whole trip. So let's bring Aubrey in now. Here she is at the Sorrel-Weed House. Aubry Northrop is with us. Hey, Audrey, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah. We are thrilled to have you here. And just so we kind of lay the basics of our conversation, where are you and why is that important? Because I know the Sorrel-Weed House is very historic.
Yeah, so I was actually lucky enough that we're not currently doing any tours tonight. January is usually our restoration time, so we're going to be closed for a lot of weekdays. So I got the whole house to myself, and I'm currently in Dr. Frank's operating room, which is located in the basement. And it's usually what a lot of guests claim to be the most haunted room in the entire house. So I do have some space between me and the back wall, so if there happen to be any shadow figure movements or anything going on back there, you guys can keep an eye out on that for me. But oddly enough, despite it being notoriously creepy, it's one of my personal favorites. I've had a lot of interactions with Dr. Frank. He cracked my back for me once and it was great. So this is like my safe zone on the property.
Okay, I'm going to jump in right there. And okay, before I ask how you had your back cracked, who is Dr. Frank?
So the house was initially constructed for Francis Sorrel and his second wife, Matilda Moxley. Now, Francis, that we're talking about here, Dr. Frank, named for his father, was Francis and the first wife's youngest child, and he was a very skilled trauma surgeon. Francis Sorrel was nice enough to let his son open up a nice little business here in the basement. So this would be the room that he practiced a lot of his surgeries. His specialty was amputations and bullet removal in the mid-1800s here.
And I like how it's just, and it's casually in the basement of this amazing Victorian home there in Savannah, Georgia. Now, he obviously is one of the spirits that's still in the house then, if you've had interactions with him. Is he friendly? Is he happy to have you there?
Oh, yeah, he's great. So usually when people have experiences with him, it's medical related. So if they had any previous injuries, they may act up. If you had any current injuries, they may act up. Again, I've got back issues, so every once in a while you'll feel the popping of the back. And I've had other guests tell me that they've had similar situations. And even then, through investigations, we discovered a lot about his personality. Some guests have said that he really enjoys music, including like the Coldplay, Beach Boys, Kanye West. So he kind of just seems to be a really hip and fun guy to have.
That's fantastic. That's saying a lot considering he's been there for a while as a spirit. And I know that whenever we met you back in, I think it was early 2022, when we met you and took the tour. You were a fantastic tour guide, by the way. We learned so much. I love the house. We went in and it wasn't even dark yet, and it was still eerie. It kind of had this feel about it, which we really, really liked. But you're no longer a tour guide. You have a new position there at the house.
Yeah, so as of roughly around last summer, early summer, late spring, I was promoted to being the lead paranormal investigator here. So I've host our late night investigations, teaching people how to properly interact with the dead in a nice and respectful manner, while teaching our dead how to properly interact with the living in an equally respectful manner, and also trying to keep it fun and lighthearted.
Which is an interesting balance, because there is such an interest in paranormal investigations, or ghost hunting, if you want to call it that. But a lot of people have never done it before or have never had a paranormal experience. With you in this new role there, well, not so new anymore, but in this role there, have you had investigators or people come in who have had like their first paranormal encounter?
Oh, yeah. So there's definitely a downside to using paranormal investigative equipment because so many people will get distracted by the equipment. And they're so focused on their gadgets that they don't realize they could have a shadow figure walk by them and they won't even realize it. So I'm trying to encourage all of the above, use everything to your advantage. And
Mhm.
by doing so, we've definitely had a lot of interesting reports from a lot of newcomers. A lot of them would see us on the TV shows and say, you know what, hey, I saw this place on this TV show and I decided I want to come check it out, but I don't know what to expect. And then they'll end up having something really, really cool, something really crazy, or even something laid back, like smelling a cigar smoke, and then it's just gone in an instant.
Mhm.
So it all kind of varies from person to person, but nonetheless, any experience is a good experience in my personal opinion.
You're exactly right. And, I think that we're all spoiled to think that, a paranormal experience needs to be something like out of the movie Poltergeist. And that's not how it usually works. It's usually these little subtle things that you'll pick up on or see. And, ever since you said that, you're in the basement and you gave some space to the wall, I keep looking for stuff. And just to kind of drive home the point, you're there by yourself. I think there's a dog there with you, but you're the only person in the house, right?
Yes, I'm the only living person in the house, and I do have my dog with me uh, for a couple of reasons. One, it's my day off, and so there's no one to tell me I can't bring her to work with me, and so that's a bonus. And also, she personally has had a few interactions in the basement down here with me as well.
Oh,
So she's
well,
kind of like a secondhand experience.
I'll say she's like part of your paranormal investigative equipment because I know that animals, at least I've heard, are very in tune to spirits and the paranormal. Is that what your
Mhm.
experience says?
Yeah, so it depends on the animal. I think she's kind of been desensitized because I've had my own experiences at my house too. So she's like, oh, it's just a ghost and won't think anything of it. But there was one time that I introduced one of our spirits to my dog. My dog's name is Esmeralda. And I told the spirit, hey, can you call my dog for me? I see my dog's ears just perk up and she just hard stares at a doorway. I say, go get her, go find the spirit. And she goes over to the doorway, like right on the edge without crossing that line into the next room, and just for a solid 10 seconds is hard staring at a corner. And I was like, there you
Wow.
go.
There you
All
go.
right.
Somebody's here with us. And I'm sure there at the Sorrel-Weed House, which is so active, I'm sure Esmeralda and yourself, have experiences. And it fascinates me that you are sitting in the basement of this haunted historic home in a location that used to be like a surgery center. And you're like so casual. I love that. Um,
It's my safe zone. I love it.
yeah. And that's perfect. That's why you're perfect for that job.
So can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is really, really interesting. So Aubrey, I want to back up a second. When you say that you felt you got your back cracked by the ghost doctor, like what? Can you explain what that felt like or how that happened?
So it honestly started off as a joke. Like I used to see a chiropractor quite frequently,
Mm.
and so I was like, "Hey, Dr. Frank, if you still practice medicine, I got a really bad back. If you don't mind, that would be great." And sure enough, like when you go to a chiropractor, when you have your back cracked, you'll feel as they work their way up, the individual vertebrae just go pop, 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 and that's exactly what happened. Like right, starting the bottom where gains went pop, 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 and that is just beautiful. And ever since I mentioned it, I've had a couple other guests try to do the exact same thing. And sure enough, they'll feel that distinct pop, pop, pop all the way up. And so I've got to love him. He's a great guy.
That's absolutely amazing. Hey, everybody, if you're watching, we are talking to Aubry Northrop, who is a tour guide and now head of paranormal investigations at the Sorrel-Weed House in Savannah.
And
Steve,
of
you were going
course,
to ask her a question. I jumped in.
no, no, that I was going to get to that, but I'm glad you asked because I can move on to the next one. So um, when we talked a year plus ago for the podcast Phantom History, you had some really cool stories that you shared with me, personal experiences that, of course, we put in the format of that podcast. That was very eerie. But when I mentioned the idea of chatting with you, you said, "I'm so glad we're chatting because there's some updates." So I was wondering if you could kind of put that into context. You have a couple of spirits that are kind of like stars of the show, but you've learned new things about those two characters. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so if you were to take any walking tour, any trolley tour, and back then, even our tours, pretty much every single tour guide will say the same style of story. And generally, the story would go something along the lines of March of 1860, Matilda, who was the original lady of the home, was getting ready for a gorgeous party here. For this party, she would have seeked out the head enslaved by the name of Molly, who had her own private bedroom on the upper level of the carriage house. Matilda went up to Molly's private bedroom and found Molly being sexually abused by her husband, Francis. Matilda then left, went up to the top balcony of the main home, jumped off or was potentially pushed off by Francis Sorrel, and she ultimately passed away. 2 weeks later, Molly was found hanging from one of the rafters in her private bedroom, potentially suicide, again, potentially murder situation. Everyone's always said some type of variation, but that's pretty much the gist of what everyone's been saying for the past 20 years since we've been doing ghost tours.
Right. And of course, the spirits of those two women are said to still be in that house, or in the carriage house, where they respectively perished. Are before we go into like what the updated news is, are those spirits there though still? I mean, do you think that they are?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Matilda tends to stay anywhere on the main floor. There was actually a guest during a history and architecture daytime tour that was not here for the paranormal whatsoever, and she took a picture in the gentleman's parlor, which is on the front side of the house. And when she did so, it looked like a reflection of a black silhouette shadow figure of a lady in a poofy dress with her hair in a nice fashionable updo bun. Conveniently, also in that room is the portrait of Matilda, the lady of the home, with this elegant, fashionable updo bun. So we think that's most likely Matilda. We've had multiple mediums pick up on the reports, and through the investigations using equipment, people have said something similar, that she's still here. As for Molly, whether or not how much has changed through the history, there is still to this day a young lady that responds to the name Molly, at least, said that she most likely worked for the Sorrels, who did pass away on the property. And to this day, she's still been seen. She's usually described as being a lady also with a nice updo bun, but it's a nice tight bun, like how a servant would have. And she'd be seen in a black dress with a white apron. So very similar attire with what you would have had in the late 1800s.
Okay. So the hauntings are still there. It's just the stories around the people of those spirits when they were living that has changed. And again, just to remind everybody, we're talking to Aubry Northrop, who works at the Sorrel-Weed House in Savannah, Georgia, one of, if not the most haunted house in that city. And you were there alone in the basement in the former space that used to be a surgical ward, because you were way braver than I am. So having said that, what is the updated story, and how do you know this new information? What has happened to change the narrative?
So my dog just...
Esmeralda saw something.
So I keep her around. She keeps me on my toes. So we have an amazing historian. I never asked him permission if I could mention him, but if he's watching this, he knows who I'm talking about. He's an amazing tour guide, 10 out of 10, highly recommend him. I'm not going to say his name, but if you read our reviews on TripAdvisor or Google, you're going to see his name pop up about 1 million times. So that guy, he's an amazing historian and does frequent research on the property just out of, I think, pure boredom and interest. He is very passionate about the home. And while doing some research last year around late August, early September, he discovered some aerial shots of the property that have been taken throughout decades, way back when in the 1800s. Through these aerial shots, it was discovered that the carriage house where Molly supposedly lived did not exist in that time frame. It actually would not have been constructed until somewhere between the 1870s to 1880s. So that would have been 10 to 20 years after the story would have taken place. He also discovered a letter that was written potentially by one of the guests that attended one of Matilda's parties that was able to document what really happened to her that night when she passed away. So that was just a beyond plot twist for us. All of the tour guides had to rewrite their scripts with this new information. And then that just sparked a severe interest too, because I've been kind of referring to it like a drama series. Like, we got to figure out what happens for season 5. Like, what happens next? Like, we're just full steam ahead trying to figure out, well, what all is going on now. So.
Yeah, like you said, it's like a cliffhanger. You got to wait through the summer and wait for the fall premiere. So the original story was that Matilda in despair and a rage, whatever it might be, found her way to the upper levels of the house and either fell or was pushed and fell to a severe injury. And if I remember right, was brought inside and passed away inside the home. But that's not necessarily what happened now, based on this new letter.
So for her story, it is very, very similar, but it's the Molly situation that threw us off.
Okay.
So with the new documentation, and I'm very strictly paraphrasing with this letter, what would have happened was March 27th of 1860. Matilda was in fact getting ready for this gorgeous party, but she was diagnosed with what we now know as bipolar depression. During this time, she was going through what was described to be a, quote, fit of lunacy. During this fit, she went up to the top balcony, willingly jumped off, landing head first down below. It was said that her head was a mangled mess. She did survive and was brought into the home, and it was there that it took her about 10 hours before she died due to head trauma. But none of this had anything to do with the enslaved girl Molly. And with this new documentation about the carriage house and looking more into the blueprints of the home, most likely the enslaved would have been kept on the 4th floor of the main home. So a lot of that kind of gave us a lot of loopholes. However, with our constant research, we did discover that the Sorrels did have a servant by the name of Molly. I say servant because it's not enslaved. The same year that Francis lost his wife Matilda, he sold the home and moved to the house next door that was initially constructed for his older children from the first marriage. Francis eventually passed away in that home, left it to his children. The children took over the property, and that would have been around the same time that the carriage house was constructed. And these kids did in fact have a servant, post-Civil War now, by the name of Molly Speed. And Molly was said to be a higher up status, somewhat like a head nanny. And with that in mind, she may have potentially had her own private bedroom, possibly the private bedroom that everyone keeps referencing to for the old story. And like a game of telephone, things just kind of got flip-flop passed around after over a century, and somehow the two stories combined. But we are still trying to figure out what about this Molly Speed is true, what really happened to her. So it's kind of a wait and see situation.
Right. Hopefully more information will be found. And if this is lining up the way I think it is, it means that Matilda and Molly like did not coexist in the space at the same time, possibly, right?
Yes.
They were like 10 years apart, as I think you said.
Yes.
Okay. And this letter, where was it found and how was it discovered? Was it like tucked away in an archive somewhere?
Something similar. So that would be more of a question for the historian, but he apparently found out about it from a staff member that no longer works with us. Unfortunately, he did pass away, but it was almost like the original historian for the home, and he had found out a lot of documentation, and it was kind of tucked away after he had passed. So now we're kind of going back and trying to figure out, pick up where he left off when he did pass away and go from there.
Right. And what I love about this, and we talked about this a little bit before we turned on the cameras, was that, I think a good historian and a good paranormal investigator is willing to take new information like this and kind of say, okay, this changes our narrative. We need to find out what actually happened. And it seems that you and the folks that run the Sorrel-Weed House have embraced this and said, oh, this is a new nugget of truth, essentially, that we need to kind of pursue. I don't know if every place does that as thoroughly as this, which I like to hear. How challenging was it for you and your team of tour guides, especially, to kind of wrap your heads around this new narrative? Because I know I've been a tour guide before. You know what you know, and it's like in there. Sometimes it's hard to shift.
Everyone had their own way of coping. So anyone that's taken our tours enough times will realize that we don't have scripts. Everything that our tour guides will talk about is purely based off of what we feel like talking about. And so it was different for everyone. I kind of just did a old versus new comparison, almost like I said, describe it as a drama series. Like, here's the plot twist for everyone, and then I'd go on to the new version of it. Very similar to how I describe it to this. I know some other tour guides would tell the old story, and then once they got into the carriage house, bring up the new pieces of information. So it all kind of just depends on who's telling the tour and how they want to go about it. Right. But I think that's what keeps it unique too, because it's the same story, it's just still on different levels of interesting.
Absolutely. Tim's
Yeah,
back.
this is really, really interesting, Aubrey. Thank you for sharing all this with us. So I have a question for you, and I think you sort of mentioned it in passing, but you really don't know yet. You have to figure out what happened to Molly the servant, right?
Yeah.
Because what I remember, probably the thing I remember, well, there were a lot of things that I remember from that tour because it was pretty amazing, and I was pretty scared, and I'm new to the paranormal stuff. But anyway, one of the things I remember was that when we were in the carriage house, it was discussed that something happened in that space because people had such emotional reactions. People couldn't even go in, or people would go in and start crying. So something dramatic and frightening, or somehow impactful happened there. Are you still assuming that that's connected with Molly, or is that maybe now we don't even know what happened there?
Yes and no. So me being more into the paranormal side of things, I definitely think the different experiences, because these have been reported for the 20 years we've been giving tours, well before I ever worked there, well before a lot of the current employees have ever worked there. So there's no way it could be maybe a psychosomatic effect, because it's been reported nonetheless, no matter how many changes have been made to the story, no matter what, it's always been consistent with the experiences and reports. I have looked into different theories. There's definitely the Molly speed. Maybe she has something to do with this. Maybe it's someone completely entirely and she just took on the name of Molly. Or another theory that I actually tossed around, I know a parapsychologist, and we've been talking from a scientific standpoint about this, is that it's been, in some cases, potentially proven that you can manifest a spirit. If you tell enough stuff enough times, they just end up creating themselves. So maybe with the X amount of years that we've been giving these tours, we in a way somehow accidentally created this poor young lady that may believe that she was raped and murdered for her entire life, which is absolutely terrible and unfortunate. But again, it's one of those, only time will tell. We'll keep doing research. I'll keep doing investigations and looking into it and asking questions, and hopefully one day, like we just recently discovered about the carriage house, we'll find out who she is.
Yeah, like I said, it's piecing together a puzzle, and what the next plot twist is. And I see that our friend Vic is watching, and he is great at catching EVPs. He does amazing work where he goes on paranormal investigations and finds these EVPs. And he said that he went there, that to the Sorrel-Weed House, he caught an EVP in the rear courtyard that said, "I want to know who you are." Which blew him away, of course. So that led me to the question for you. Now that you're more on the paranormal research side of the house, what are some of, like, I mean, you talked about cigar smells and things like that, but what are some of the more technical things that have been discovered? Are there EVPs? Are they pretty common? Are there apparitions caught on camera? I mean, what kind of evidence has been showing up in some of these?
So I'll admit, I have the worst luck with pictures and EVPs. I don't think I've ever gotten an EVP here. I rarely get any slight bit interesting pictures. So it really makes it complicated. But firsthand experiences, that doesn't change the fact that I've still had plenty with me, usually being in cases like this where I'm the only living person in the house. Seeing shadow figures, I saw in the reflection of a door frame an apparition when I was walking into this room, and I tried to recreate it to double check it was me. 4 times I walked by that door. It wasn't me. I don't know who it was, but it wasn't me.
Right.
So cases like that are very common. Hearing footsteps, and I did slightly mention this to you, that it takes a lot to scare me. And then I mentioned before we started chatting, before we started the live stream, that I had something that genuinely scared me. I've kind of been desensitized. Like, I can see an apparition walk by, I'm not going to think anything of it. I can hear like some footsteps on the floor above me, I'm not going to think anything of it. But yesterday really threw me off. I was giving a practice tour to a gentleman who's hopefully going to be working for us soon, just so we can get a point of view of how our tours usually go. And we finished up in the upper level of the carriage house. And I'm kind of just answering his questions that he may have. We're on the upper level of the carriage house. Above me is the ceiling, and above that is the roof. Like, there's no higher up situation than that.
Right.
But it very distinctly sounded like a child landed on the roof right above my head, which sent me running into this random stranger's arms. And when I ran over to him, the footsteps followed me on the roof towards where I was going. And that just made it even worse, to the point where I was like, nope, I'm done. I'm going to second guess why I ever chose to work here. I'm just going to leave and not come back. You can have my job. Bye. Because no one expects something to be on the roof. Yes, if you're walking on a floor, not a roof. That got me.
And it sounded like it was following you on the roof, like it stayed above you. Wow. So to Tim's point earlier, something is going on in the carriage house. It may not be Molly. Maybe it is Molly, but something else is out there as well. And I know when you and I chatted for the initial podcast episode, you shared with me, and I just listened to this, a couple months ago, actually, you shared with me that you actually do not enjoy being in the dark. You have a fear of the dark. Is that still the case?
Yes. Yes, it is. I hate the dark. It's terrifying. I don't like it. It's a bit scary. I can see a shadow figure and I'll be fine with it, because at least then I know I'm not alone in the dark. I've got some random dead guy with me, so it's not as creepy. But if I'm by myself in the dark, I also don't do scary movies, and I can't do the fake haunted houses with jump scares. I'm going to die of a heart attack. It's just not going to work out.
It's not going to work out. But you can handle the natural supernatural. I guess would be the right way of phrasing that. Tim, you're on mute.
You're muted.
I want to make sure I heard that right. Sorry, I was muted, everybody. I want to make sure I heard that right. You said that if you're in the dark, it's frightening, but if you're in the dark with some sort of spirit, it's less frightening. That's so interesting to me. How can that be less frightening if there's a shadow figure?
I don't want to be alone. And whether you're alive or dead, you're still a person, so I know I'm not by myself. So that it's like gives me at least some type of comfort to know that I'm not alone in the thoughts with my own head or whatever this creepy thing is going on in my brain. I'll take a dead person over that any day.
Okay, that's really, really interesting perspective. And the fact that you can be so used to it that's like, doesn't bother you at all. So here's my question. I don't want to be like that skeptical guy, right? But could it have been a squirrel or something that jumped on the roof and ran across when you thought you heard this thing following you? I'm sorry, I'm not a debunker, but.
It's a very valid point, because we actually, if any of you follow us on TikTok, we've got a squirrel named Dave that very frequently watches through the courtyard. And I saw him right before we went into the carriage house. He was throwing palm tree seeds at my head while I was talking. So I did think maybe it was Dave, but it was too heavy. Like I've done animal rescue work. I know like how much weight is to like a rodent of that size. This had some heft to it. This sounded like a pretty good size, like distinct footsteps. And as soon as I ran outside, and Dave was still sitting in his palm tree, so it wasn't Dave.
But too hefty to be Dave.
They have a squirrel with a name, because we name everything around here at Phantom History House. So the fact that you guys name everything makes me feel good. And yeah, I mean, it was either one really hefty squirrel or something else. But yeah, I'm not doubting your story, and it sounds really frightening. So have you had any repercussions from this new tour guide? Like, is this person avoiding you now, or like asking you out? Like, what happened after this little encounter?
Well, he is married, and I actually took the time to genuinely thank him for letting me just casually run to him in last minute, because I was telling him we do have another tour guide. Again, I don't want to keep throwing different tour guides in either a light or a dark face, but we do have another tour guide that's kind of on the younger side. That's definitely gets a little bit more jumpy about these situations. After this happened, I called that tour guide up and said, I'm so glad I'm with this new guy, because I know if it was you would have left me and I would have been stuck here by myself. And he was like, yep, I would have been gone. I would have just ditched you. I was like,
I think that's what I love about people in your role, because it's such a human place to be. People I think see paranormal investigators or historians as these very, and you are, but very serious in your role, of course. And nothing can scare me because I do this all the time. Obviously, that's not how this works. I mean, we are all afraid of what we don't know, and surprises like this. So it shows that human side of you. I know, and again, I know I keep referencing our previous conversation, but I know that whenever we talked before, you had shared that there were also spirits of some children in the house, and one of my favorite stories that you shared with me, and I'm hoping you kind of retell it a little bit, was I don't remember the child's name, but the child you saw hands under a couch. Does that sound familiar? And have you seen that child since?
So I still couldn't 100% confirm who it was because when I got into the investigative field, I realized how many children we really do have on the property. Because it's one thing if you say, "Oh, I saw a ghost kid," but when you are here enough times, then you realize that they've got different personality, play styles, appearances, responses. So I, to this day, am not 100% sure who was underneath the couch. But with the floor that it was on, because it was in the women's parlor when that happened, and I still remember the little teeny tiny hands very quickly. So it was either George or Matilda Ann, which would have been two of the children that Matilda, the original lady of the home, had lost at a young age. I don't know which one. I have learned from hosting the late night investigations that George can be quite playful,
Mhm.
and has definitely taken quite a playful liking to me specifically, and will occasionally and honestly just instinctively try to scare me at this point to see what he can get away with.
Right.
So
It's a game
if
now.
I had to make a guess, it was
Yeah.
probably him.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about before we start wrapping up, because I'm happy to see her again, is the doll sitting on the chair, and I think it's a rocking chair behind you. That's the same one that made an appearance before, I think.
Yep.
Tell me the backstory to her and why is she there? Because I know that she was kind of a surprise to the house.
Yeah. So this is Betsy, and actually Betsy now has a "Hello, my name is" sticker for her. But Betsy traumatized, I think, a lot of the ghost tour guides because we all kind of just came into work one day and she was sitting in an armchair on the lower level of the carriage house. And you know what? Anyone that's into the spooky vibes has probably heard of Annabelle and Robert the Doll and other notoriously spooky doll-like toys. So
Hmm.
if we see a random porcelain doll just show up, we are genuinely very, very concerned about our safety and well-being at that point. And for about 3 weeks, Betsy would just show up in random spots. She'd be in the armchair, she'd be in the wheelchair, she'd be upstairs in the chair. She would just keep jumping around.
Hmm.
And eventually, thank goodness, my boss came forward and said, "Oh yeah, by the way, I brought a doll into the house."
Ah.
Yeah, no kidding. Thanks for mentioning it sooner than later. Um, but now that I know that she's not actually haunted and that she doesn't just casually move around the property on her own, usually it's my boss, I kind of took her under my wing and have been using her almost as like my own paranormal mascot. So she's got her "Hello, my name is." She's got an official Sorrel-Weed House paranormal investigator lanyard badge.
Perfect.
So she's just kind of every investigation, every ghost tour, I'll put her out on display so everyone gets to know that this is my little homegirl. She helps
All
me with
right.
the spooky stuff.
Now, and I love that because I know when we talked before, you were like, I don't know where she came from. She freaks us out, but I don't think she has an attachment. And I know now that you have this new role of and being on the paranormal investigative side, there's you have access to almost all the house. And before we kind of go into that part, I think you shared with me that there's been some renovations done to the house. So is there more access to the house now than when Tim and I were up there 2 years ago?
So we're not 100% done with everything yet. We are ideally hoping to have the entire 3 floors, so basement, main floor, and then the bedrooms open for tours by at least the end of 2025.
Okay.
Right now, we did just get a new roof in. For those of you that don't know, we are a nonprofit, so all of the money that we make from our tours goes towards that restoration process. So unfortunately, we can't just have everything done in an instant from some rich guy that was like, "I want to buy an old house." But
Right.
we did at least get a new roof. We got the dining room fixed up, and my amazing boss gifted me Dr. Frank's recovery room and morgue area, which is located on that side through those red doors. And that should actually be open by springtime. And that's going to be exclusively for paranormal investigations and our adult ghost tours. So
Okay.
you'll get a little bit of an extra sneak peek. We're going to go a little bit further into what happens when you die from these surgeries. What happens if you were supposed to be dead, but we accidentally buried you alive? What happens if you survived and then you're going to die 2 weeks later due to disease? All of
Mhm.
that fun stuff into the death process.
Okay. And of course, beyond that too, I know you said that, there's some soldiers that are possibly down there, based on our previous conversation, because it was, used during, I can't remember if it was the Civil War or beyond. You may have to correct me.
Revolutionary.
What was that?
Revolutionary.
Revolutionary War. Yeah. I was trying to remember my dates. So I know that there's a lot of activity on that property. So if somebody is interested in doing one of these paranormal investigations or just taking a tour of the house, when is your season for this, and how can people sign up?
So we host everything year round because the way I see it, we're haunted year round. So there's no point in putting a downer on that.
Right.
But we'll have our history and architecture tours going usually from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. every hour on the hour. That will cover the people while they were alive. And if you want to actually see the house with lights on and sunshine and not in a creepy dark light, that's a really, really good option. Then we also have the ghost tours, and those are going to run pretty much the same situation every single day of the year with some exclusions. And those are going to run from usually 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. every hour on the hour. And lastly, the paranormal investigations will usually start about 11 o'clock, and they'll run Tuesdays through Sundays.
Okay.
11 p.m. Let me specify. I'm not going to wake up at 11 a.m. 11 p.m.
Well, no, you have some late hours now. So, Tim, you and I need to start planning our next trip. It sounds like. And you muted again. Turn on your microphone, Tim. It's okay.
I did it again.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm trying to learn this thing. So, Aubrey, thank you for sharing all these stories. It's really cool. I definitely would like to go back, and I'm braver now, and I know more. So, I would definitely do the nighttime thing that I was too chicken to do the first trip. Listen, I went in the house, everybody. I get credit. I went in and I did,
yes.
and there were some lights flickering and things while we were there. So I feel like we had a little bit of experience. Anyway, before we go, we finished this conversation. You mentioned that George is mischievous and sometimes tries to scare you. Can you give us an example or two of like what is that? What would he be doing? Where you're thinking like, oh, there's George.
So there have been a few cases. One that really stands out, again, tying back to porcelain dolls, not Betsy, because I like Betsy. Betsy no longer scares me. But we do have another porcelain doll that is named Melissa Lynn. Melissa Lynn terrifies me. I would always make a joke that she looks like the kind of doll that would kill me in my sleep and then brag about it to all of her doll friends. So I just did not like her under any circumstances. But I put her out for investigations because the kids said that they liked her. And I was like, all right, I can put her out for the investigations, let you play with the doll. That's fine. But I had my rules. Like, if I saw her move, if I heard her laugh, if she looked at me, even if her eyes just slightly moved at me, anything at all, we got a trash can out front. She's going in there and I'm setting it on fire. Like, end of story, we're done. And I would go about this spiel pretty much every single investigation without fail. And her box was actually located in the study, and I'd have her on display in the women's parlor. So at the end of the night, I have to take her from the women's parlor to the gentleman's parlor, to the foyer, to the study. Then I can put her away. And every night, I swear to God, man, if I see her, I swear to God, guys, I'm constantly going on. And then it was almost like George was like, I wonder how serious she is. How legit is this situation of her being angry with the doll? And so I had Melissa Lynn underneath my arm like this. I'm sitting here and I'm taking her back to the study. And I kid you not, it feels like this tiny little porcelain hand just goes poke in my side. I felt really bad because there was actually another tour going by out front, and I'm going to try not to cuss for this, but no, like I'm running, I throw her in her box, I slam the door, lights off, and I'm booking it out that house. And it took me probably a solid month before I was willing to take the doll back out, but she couldn't leave her box. She had to stay in the box. And then eventually we were able to make a compromise. Her box is now right next to the chair where I display her. So it's a quick in, out, and that's it. So no carrying, no nothing like that. Never again. Can't do it.
That is fantastic that you put a haunted doll in timeout. That is perfect.
Hey, those are scary. I have to tell you,
Yeah.
when we were in New Orleans and we visited that haunted apartment and there was a whole room of those dolls, I have to tell you, that's one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. I'm just not. No.
Yeah, that
And
was like noon. It was the middle of the
Aubrey,
day.
we're always looking for stuff to bring into the house, to make it cool and a little bit creepy and fun and everything. But like we are not bringing any of those dolls in. I'm with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you come visit us, Aubrey, leave the dolls there. You're welcome to come
I
see
can
us.
live with
Leave the
that.
dolls
I'm not putting them in my car. Are you kidding me?
there.
We're not
Fair
doing
enough.
that.
I mean,
They
I
got to stay
suppose
on
you
the
could.
property forever. That's going to be the rule.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
suppose you could bring Betsy. She seems pretty harmless, but even then, I'm not sure I would sleep very well. So maybe no, maybe
Yeah.
no. But we do
Yeah.
hope that you're going to come see Phantom History House sometime. We would love to have a live conversation with you in the potion room sometime.
Yeah, I was hoping to do a trip this year. My dog's been kind of struggling. She's getting up there in age. So I was going to do a dog trip with her. And there was a place in Florida I wanted to check out where I could take her kayaking with the manatees. So I was going to do
nice.
that. And I was like, well, why don't I just do a loop-de-round trip since you guys are down there anyways?
We would love that. Yeah, we would
We
love
would
to see
love
you.
to see
And
you.
we definitely want to make a trip back up to Savannah, see more of the city, of course, visit you, visit the Sorrel-Weed House and see all the stuff you've done there. And we can't thank you enough for taking time to talk to us again and fill us in on these updates on the historic side, which I find fascinating on top of the paranormal side. It just goes back to that statement I always say is that, it's history first and the paranormal later. These entities were once people, and then we're learning more about them as we uncover more of the paper trails and stuff behind them. So I love that you and your team do that and take it so seriously. I think it's very cool. So thanks for all the work that you do.
And thanks to Victor and everybody else who's been watching live. And hopefully other people will enjoy this conversation when we have it up later. So
Absolutely.
Aubrey, you were wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing these new stories and talking with us again.
Not a problem at all. I'm always happy to be here with you guys.
We
Okay,
appreciate
thanks
it.
a
And tell all the
lot.
spirits thank you as well, because we're happy that they were. I didn't see anything behind you, but I've been looking. So we'll watch the video again and see if we caught anything.
Okay, thanks. Bye, everybody.